Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of the Hot Path Show. I'm Johnny, joined by Danny. Welcome in, Danny. We got a nice round power of 2 number here on the episode show number. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Pretty good.
Awesome. Well, yeah, welcome in, everybody, and we got a very exciting episode for you today. As you may have seen by the title of the stream, I'm going to be showcasing a data-oriented damage system today. I think this is going to be a particularly fun topic. I've kind of used a kind of data-oriented combat system in a couple of the projects that I've created for my channel and some other things. And so I kind of want to start, sharing some things about this combat system. And this is going to be kind of the first part of that. It's basically where we're just kind of building this damage system. And then we're going to go into some of the other things that I've kind of built off of this in future episodes. So yeah, very much looking forward to it. So yeah, how does that sound, Danny?
Sounds great. I mean, I only just saw a little bit of the code, so I'm very excited to see what you actually, the way you set it up and everything.
Yeah. It's going to be an exciting one, I think. So anyways, before we get into it, do you just want to point out a couple of things here? So let me go ahead and just let everybody know that there is an asset store sale going on right now. We do have the Fresh Assets Spring Edition. So these are all like brand new assets on the asset store that have kind of been posted recently. There is one DOTS one that I did come across here, which is the Agents Navigation Crowds expansion. So some of you may have seen the regular Agents Navigation package before, and so this is kind of a crowds expansion off of this one. I've picked this asset up, but I haven't really played around with it too much. But it is an expansion again, just for the regular Agents Navigation assets.
Do you know if it's flow field based?
So I don't. I think it actually might be. They might say something about it in here. Let's see if we can just do a quick little Control F for flow, workflow,
using flow velocity,
flow fields. Yep.
There you go. The classic crowd sim attack.
Exactly. And yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit more about flow fields actually in a upcoming section of this show here. But yeah, I definitely want to play around with this because I've been very happy with the regular Agents Navigation package. This one just kind of uses the regular nav meshes, but it is fully compatible with entities as well as game objects, and I've been incredibly happy with this asset. So, when I saw a couple weeks ago that Lucas came out with the kind of expansion for this was an immediate buy for me. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull the link for this and post it in the chat for everybody here. So yeah, feel free to go ahead and check that out. Other thing that I wanted to bring up is we do have GDC, the Game Developers Conference, coming up in just about a month here. I am going to be attending at GDC. And so, yeah, if anyone else is going to be attending, then maybe we could kind of arrange some sort of meetup or something at some point. Or maybe even get a petition going to get Danny flown out to GDC so we could do.
I mean, it is a lot further for me.
The Hot Pet Show in the person. What was that?
Yeah, it is a lot further for me though.
Yeah. It's just a short drive for me, but it's a long flight for you. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost in the entire other side of the globe. So.
Exactly. And you probably wouldn't be able to get a direct flight either, so you'd have to like fly through London or something.
Yeah. Usually Holland, actually, I think. But
oh, really? Okay. Cool. All right. And yeah, welcome in the bowl. Glad to have you in here. Yeah, so the other thing that I wanted to bring up is netcode for entities tutorial. Still have been working on that. It has been a lot of editing. Danny, I don't know if you had saw, but a couple weeks ago I had done a little guessing game with the community to see how many hours of footage, of raw footage.
I don't think I've seen that. I don't.
It was the episode that Tobias was on.
Oh, okay.
But, so yeah, I did 16 hours and 45 minutes of just raw footage, and so that is basically like that was like including like scripts compiling and the project building when I was like building the project to showcase it, and there were a bunch of sections that I had to kind of like re-record and kind of rearrange things and everything like that. So I've just finished the kind of, I call it the rough cut, which is kind of like my first initial pass just through all the footage. I just clip out all the bad stuff and all the pauses and mistakes and rearrange everything and get it in line. So take a quick guess. How long do you think the runtime is at right now of the video?
2 hours.
You
One
think
and a half.
You think the video is all the way down to 2 hours from 16 hours?
I'm hoping. Maybe you were just stuttering a lot or something.
You think I kept 14 hours out of the
Yes,
out of
yes.
the
I'm.
footage?
I have. It's probably more something like 14 hours. Maybe.
No, I'm actually kind of in the middle. It's actually I cut out a lot more than I initially thought that I was going to cut out. It's actually down to about 5 hours and 36 minutes. So cut out a little over 11 hours, which is pretty crazy.
That's not too bad. That's yeah.
There were definitely like a couple of times where I like had the camera rolling and I like stepped away for a little bit, and then there was like a couple of times where I was like recording and it just like I like went over and like compiled and it just like didn't work. So then I'm like doing troubleshooting while the video is going on. So yeah.
Yeah,
And
Unity
a lot
reloaded
of,
and compiling.
Unity domain reload and compiling and all that. So
Yes.
yeah, so yeah, look forward to that. Again, I'm trying to have that out by the end of the month here. Now that I kind of have that like initial pass in place, and seeing that I only have about 5.5 hours of footage to go through for the rest of that, it's going to be pretty good. It may end up being a little bit longer because I do want to add in a couple like theory sections where I'm kind of like talking about just the theory of netcode for entities. And so, by the way, this tutorial, I'm not going over any deployment of UGS or Relay or anything like that. It's basically just focused on getting a local version of the netcode for entities set up. But yeah.
Does that include like a dedicated server, or is it more like, yeah? What's your plan?
It's kind of like a host setup, where it's like because again it is like a server authoritative model, but basically I have like the host and client running on like my main machine, and then I have like builds that can connect to that. But I kind of just have like a little drop down where you can say set a build to be in like server only mode, and then you can have client only modes connect to that server. So it's pretty flexible in that sense. But yeah, so look forward to that. And then other stuff that we got going on. By the way, you can support us over on Patreon. Again, we do have this show available to everybody, including all the project files that we're going to be showcasing and discussing on this episode. But if you do want to support us extra, we do have some cool bonuses on there. So I did just post our first Q&A thread for the monthly Ask Me Anything for the L1 Cash supporters and up. So if you are at those support levels, feel free to go over there and post in your questions there for this month. And then next week I'm going to be posting a video about how I would make Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 with dots. So I'm just going to be kind of playing through Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 a little bit and just kind of like theorizing about how it would make some of the different systems and everything. So that's going to be a fun video. So feel free to look forward to that. And again, that bonus video is going to be available to Patreon supporters at all levels over there. So yeah, thank you for the support over there. So anyways, we can go ahead and start getting into some of our main topics for the show. So we're going to start with the prefetch. And the one thing that I did want to bring up today, of course, is probably the topic that is on a lot of people's minds, which is Sora AI. So,
well, as of yesterday, I don't think anyone knew before then.
Exactly. Yeah, this is something that OpenAI just kind of released out to the world yesterday, where they basically created a text to video generation where they can essentially generate videos up to 1 minute long just by using, text prompts ranging from, pretty simple and generic text prompts to things that are a lot more specific. So it is not available to the public right now. They're kind of mostly testing it right now, but They kind of first went public with this kind of announcement of this yesterday, and they were showcasing, a lot of the videos and things that they've been creating with it. So it's a little bit unclear about, how long it takes to generate one of these videos off of a text prompt and so on. But just kind of going through, I mean, it is pretty amazing some of the things that they've kind of came up with. So here's kind of like the first kind of like headline image of this woman walking kind of through Tokyo, and it's pretty hyper realistic looking. And of course, like if you're looking close and that you're on like a AI generated page, you're going to be looking for all the little inconsistencies and everything like
the
that.
legs, they look a little too smooth, weird.
Yeah, and they kind of slide across the ground in weird ways, and like they're kind of like crossover sometimes. So there's definitely like some weird things, like if you're looking for it. But again, if you're not necessarily looking for it, like you might not pick up on all these things. So it is pretty wild. I think a couple of the impressive ones I saw, of course, there's this one, which is this kind of like old-timey grainy footage, and and especially if you're kind of using like maybe a lower quality, like it can kind of hide some of those inconsistencies a little bit better. A couple of the ones that I found particularly impressive was like this one here, where it's this like car driving on this dirt road. And I mean, it is really impressive. This car is like, perfectly tracking this dirt road. And it kind of like,
it does look like a video game in a way, the car itself.
Yeah, because it's kind of like a fixed camera point of view.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is if this was a video game, this would be a really good looking video game.
Good looking video game, I will say.
Yeah.
But actually, I did see someone generate Minecraft footage using it as well.
Yeah.
And it just looks like a weird, wacky dreamscape sort of.
Yeah. But yeah, it is interesting that it kind of has some like limited understanding of like physics, like how there's like kind of the dust kicking up from the like the back of the wheels here. There's like kind of another one where there's like some dogs playing in snow, and like the snow is kind of like flying off their faces. They're kind of like moving the head around and everything. This one is actually one that I was very impressed by, where it's just kind of like a very simple scene of like a camera kind of moving through an art gallery. And the reason that I found this one particularly impressive is because like I've seen kind of some AI generated video in the past where there is like kind of like a fixed image, but it kind of like morphs and changes over time, especially as like the perspective shifts.
Yes.
Like kind of like
it does look stable here.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like everything is pretty like lock solid in, and even though like as the angles are changing and like the perspective at which the camera is viewing these different images is changing, like it's not, like the pictures aren't like necessarily morphing. They're like the same picture, but it's just like a different angle on it. So I thought that one was particularly impressive to me.
Just to answer this question, it's not available.
Correct. Yeah.
And I feel like it must also end up being
now.
Yeah, and it must also be expensive when it comes out, because that's a lot of compute right there.
Yeah, because there is kind of, again, it has to kind of like not only understand just like kind of regular image generation, but then also how things are interacting with each other and have some again limited understanding of physics. But yeah, and then it's cool because they kind of brought up some of like the weaknesses of it. So there's like somebody running on a treadmill, but they're running like completely backwards on the treadmill, so it's like okay, it kind of understands, even though it's not necessarily like something possible that you could do. Or
I mean, for like checking out your own animation and maybe like mocking up your own game animation in a 3D program, that might still be a good reference.
You mean like for like getting a walk cycle or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Although this one, did you see this one where there's like the dogs and there's like new dogs appearing and they're like morphing into each other?
What the fuck is going on?
Like
no, that's how dogs work.
3 dogs, and then there's like 7 by the end.
I see no issue. What the fuck?
And And then we have a basketball that kind of like drops through the hoop and then it explodes and a new basketball spawns. And then there's like weird things, like there's this like kind of chair that's like liquid almost, and then there's like so I mean there's definitely like some weird things going on here, but like admittedly, I mean this is really high quality looking stuff. And that is interesting. Someone says that I saw some speculation that they trained the model on Unreal Engine 5 to give it physics and spatial knowledge. That kind of makes sense, right? To kind of like have
I could see that happening.
Some simulation software, and yeah,
and it also explains why things move the way that they do, because it is very game-like movement, if you know. Like,
yeah, I noticed
it's very smooth, quaternion, almost. Yeah.
I'm gonna see
again
if I can
that
find...
car. To me, that car is so gamey.
Yeah.
It's almost like an Unreal 5 Lumen, you know, show all the things that the dirt and the dust kind of example.
Yeah, there's a couple of videos in here about where they're like kind of like some things are moving and some physics things are happening. I'm trying to think of like a particular one where I could kind of showcase this behavior, but it almost looks like some of the motion is like filmed in reverse. Like, you ever seen those videos where like, you know, someone does some action and then they like play the video in reverse to make it look kind of different? Like, that's almost how kind of like some of the physics acts for me. Yeah, in this video there's like one particular shot where they kind of like move something up onto like a door. I think it's coming up right here. Yeah, right there. Like it almost looks like that happens like in reverse, you know what I mean? Like it kind of speeds up and then slows down, like just kind of like the movement of that. But otherwise, I mean, this is very impressive about like, you know, all the details and everything with this. So.
It definitely does mean that people have to be more skeptical of anything they watched ever in the future. Because
certainly,
you can certainly not trust an image anymore, and video is already skeptical at this point.
Right. I will say the one kind of defining thing right now with the OpenAI videos is you'll see in the lower right corner there's kind of like a little like barcode looking thing that will morph into the OpenAI logo. So that is one way that you can kind of tell that it was made with OpenAI, but obviously it's right in the lower corner, and that's fairly easy to, you know, crop out.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it is wild stuff. And so yeah, I mean, I guess to kind of maybe like tie this into games a little bit, like, how do you see any potential uses this could be used for in games at all, or do you kind of have any thoughts of?
I don't know. I like with the art stuff, didn't like concept art and stuff like that. It makes more sense. Whereas this video stuff, I don't feel like game development, other than maybe, again, as I said earlier, animation.
Right.
Might help
using it as a reference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I saw someone comment on the fact that this particular one, like, why is it curious about the flaw? Like, where no human animator would make it curious about a flaw, I don't think.
Whoa, this texture. Yeah. And no, that is interesting about it, you know, potentially being trained on Unreal Engine 5 physics. I think one thing that I've kind of heard with a lot of the AI generation is, you know, of course, in the beginning, it seems like a lot of kind of copyrighted data and things that were already kind of available online were just kind of being scraped and data was being trained on that. But one thing that I've heard that a lot of kind of like AI researchers are doing now is doing things where they're more kind of like generating the input data, where you know, maybe they'll go into like a 3D modeling program like Blender or something like that, and they'll model out something that kind of like, you know, resembles a water bottle, right? And then they'll kind of train it on that data, but then they'll also use kind of some of the features that are available in Blender to kind of do some, you know, vertex manipulation to make, you know, a bunch of different variations of water bottles, and then it can kind of like now train that on the larger data set.
I can almost see people going into Houdini to make like a generic bottle maker. and then it just generates a bazillion different bottles.
Yeah,
just for
certainly.
AI.
Exactly.
But,
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like is something that some of these AI researchers are trying to do, and with the goal of getting higher quality data, and then again they're kind of training that off of data that they own, so there isn't kind of that separate copyright concern that I know is kind of a big issue for a lot of people.
yeah. Yep.
Cool. So did you have anything else to say on any of this OpenAI stuff other than we're all doomed?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think we're doomed yet, but it does seem like OpenAI is moving way too fast right now.
Yeah, it is impressive tech, and it is insane how quickly we got here. And yeah, only time will tell where this goes in the very near future.
Yeah.
Okay, error correction codes. This is where we do our corrections from the previous episode. So, by the way, if you do notice us, say anything incorrectly, you can feel free to leave that in the comments section below. Don't have any, serious corrections here, but I do just want to point out a small correction for you from last week. We're talking about we're talking about the Super Bowl. You said that you had traveled to Seattle, and they were starting to. You said they were going to host the Super Bowl there, right?
No, I didn't say they were going to host it. I just said that, what's it called? Like the host family I was at, like hosted their own little.
Oh,
thing.
that a Super Bowl party?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like a watch party.
I thought you were saying that, because the way the Super Bowl works is like one stadium, just one random stadium in the nation is like dedicated as like the Super Bowl host for that year. So it has never been in Seattle. So I thought that's what you were saying.
Really? Damn.
What?
I didn't know that it never was in Seattle.
Yeah, it's never been in Seattle. But yeah, the Seattle Seahawks have been in the Super Bowl a couple times, and they've won, I think, like maybe 10 years ago or so. But yeah, do you know who won the Super Bowl this Sunday?
No. I don't even think I know a single person that is placed in the Super Bowl.
Taylor Swift.
Soccer, nor any other sport.
Taylor Swift was the.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, that sounds right. No, wasn't it? What's it called? Like Ryan Gosling.
Kansas City Chiefs.
No. I think it was Ryan Gosling.
Ryan Gosling.
Have you ever seen the Grammys this year, where Ryan Gosling won one of the awards?
I didn't know.
Yeah, no, there was this famous clip of him going like, "Wait, I won."
He won for like the Barbie thing?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. I didn't even know that. Well,
because he
anyways,
is enough. But yeah,
yes, that's an error correction on my part for misunderstanding what you meant.
No, yeah, I might just also have worded it wrong, so it sounds like that.
All good.
No, I'm never wrong. What are you? No.
Right.
Yeah. That's how that works.
All right. Well, let's get into our cash hit, the Unity Dots quick tip of the week. So, Danny, you're taking over our quick tip of the week. So, what do you got for us here?
Yes, I'll see if I can share my screen first and foremost. That is required. Present. Share screen. Because last time, yes, I should be sharing my screen now.
Yep.
There we go. Yes, last time I mentioned that it is possible to see your source code even though you don't have writer. So like the source generated code. So if we look at any piece of code, anytime that we write partial, it actually means that there's a source generator running, generating the other part of the partial, like another partial type inside it. And the way that we can normally...
could you just zoom in a little bit more? I think the
yes.
Yeah, stream it looks a little better with it being bigger.
There we go.
Don't need to go that far, but yeah.
Well, I just need this button, so it's fine.
Fair.
As long as people can see that it is, in fact, a system, it's all good. Sweet. Actually, I wonder what that blue line is about. Oh, yeah, no, that's wrong. Anyways, so the fact that any time that we have these partial types where we require you to say partial, it's because of source generation. And in writer, there's this feature where you can press dots and then say show generated code, and then you can actually see all of the generated code for that system,
Right.
which is just a partial of that system. So you can actually see that this is the canvas setup system. This is also the canvas setup system, and it would have to map out all the names and etc. So it basically generates the other side of the partial. But normally you can only see this in Writer, not Visual Studio, not VS Code. If you use any other editor, it's very impractical. Because here's the thing, your editor here in Writer actually does run Roslyn source generators inside of here. Like there's this little Roslyn logo down here. Now, if you do want to see it in other things, there's a very hidden feature. I should probably have put it in a better spot, documentation-wise, when I made it. But you can actually, the way I usually find it, because I also can't remember it, is I just go in and search source gen in here, and then I notice that there's an attribute. I just go to the changelog.
Source gen files, nice.
Yeah, so it's a define called .output source gen files. You put that in your project. Edit, player settings, project settings, player. You put it in here, and as soon as you do that, then as it also says right here, all of your generated C# files will be put in the temp generated code folder.
Nice.
So all the generated files, if you go to your project.
Is your default text Comic Sans?
No? What do you... No, I would never use Comic Sans.
What is it, the Comic Sans monospaced then?
I actually had this thing in university where I would make sure that every project, every report, every essay, everything that I ever wrote in at university had to include Comic Sans in a notable way somewhere. Just as a little bit of a challenge, especially because some of the work that I had to do was design based. So it was even more fun to do.
To like try and slip it in there somewhere.
Yeah. And I usually got pretty good grades from it, because I would then afterwards tell them, hey, this is actually Comic Sans. Anyways, so I can, see my project, then temp, then generated code. Then it will specify every single assembly, because source generators run on a per assembly basis.
Okay.
And then, you can see your own project is normally called the assembly C# assembly. So these are all the systems and stuff being generated. So we generate a file for every system, and those have __ system. And we generate, the second part of an iJob entity, and those are __ job entity. And then you can see all of the generated code in here. And the way that most of these, yeah, but the way that most of these work is just that they will, take your function, and then they will have this attribute on top called the .compiler patch method, and then an IL postprocessor will go in and search for an onUpdate with 0 type arguments that passes in a ref of Unity entity system state. So it will go searching for this. And then the IO post processor will make sure to basically just take that piece of source code and plop it into the, the thing that matches this string here.
Interesting.
Because that's the thing that you can't do with C#. Source generators can only generate valid C# code. And a lot of what our generators do requires us to do modifications on top of that. So this is a way of doing interception. And actually in C#, I think 11, it's either 11 or 12, there's a new feature called interceptors, which kind of does a similar thing where you can override a particular line and say, hey, when you call this, then it will actually map to this generated thing instead. Which is pretty cool.
I do like how when you're looking at if you're inspecting any of the generated code, it has like a comment above kind of the line that shows like, the line number of where it is in your project, so you can kind of like match those to see.
Yeah. Do you know why that is? Because it is not in fact a normal comment, if you noticed.
Oh, because it's like the hashtag comment, you mean?
Yeah. So it's what's it called? Like a line pragma statement saying, hey,
preprocessor define.
Yeah. Well, it's not really a preprocessor because this is C#. I don't think they call it the preprocessor. Oh, they kind of do, but anyways.
Yeah.
they are basically just indicating that, hey, when you go and debug, when you press down a breakpoint, right? You want to be able to put down a breakpoint in your code.
Right. And have it line up with the generated code, even though the line numbers
exactly.
won't likely match up.
It not only likely, it straight up is just the wrong file to begin with, because like, for instance, here on update is being replaced. So it is not this on update that is being called. In fact, it's the other update that is being called. Like, it's the one in here that is being called. So on update in here is being called, and then you still want to be able as a user to put a breakpoint right here. Like, when I put a breakpoint here, that should still be hit. So what it's doing is, okay, now I'm running here. I know that you run to this line. It actually maps to line 63, which is the line in here. So if there is a breakpoint at line 63, I should hit. So yeah, it does like it does a mapping, making sure all the debug symbols map over, and that's why it's there. But it also is very useful for just like seeing which code turns into what code. Usually the things you will see changing in here is any place that you use system API will now have like a this is clearly a system API for each, but now it turned into an if.query, passing in a type handle and stuff. So yeah, that's usually
like how you call it if. It's like leg.
We have many of those names. ECB entity command buffer, ECB sys.
You don't call it an ECB though.
ECB, nah, no. ISys, sysbase, EFE, IJE, IJOb entity. Yeah. Anyway, we have names for everything, I feel like, at this point.
Yeah.
Because it's too much to type, but yeah, that's the hot tip. Just go in changelog and find this attribute. This define, and then put it in your project if you want to see any of the generated code. It's very useful for like figuring out how our Lower API works. How does an iJob chunk work? You can just look at an iJob entity and see what kind of job it generates. Like here, job entity. This is how an iJob chunk works with some type handles and stuff. And then you can do a few changes and look back in what it generates. It's a very good testing tool.
Yeah. It has been helpful the times that I've needed to kind of like go and inspect the generated files to kind of get a little bit more information about what's going on or why something is one way or the other. So yeah, it is helpful stuff.
Nice.
All right, well, sweet. We can go ahead and move over into our context switch. So this is where we start kind of diving a little bit deeper into some ECS topics. So here I want to talk about a live stream that actually happened the other day. Let's go ahead and do this and that. Okay, sweet. So yeah, Unity basically shared this live stream on their YouTube channel and their Twitch channel just the other day. They're talking with the developers of this game called Cataclysmo, which is kind of like a base builder, tower defense, real-time strategy type game. And so they're kind of like talking about their game. They talked a little bit about the history of the studio and all that. And one of the main sections of this video is how they were talking about how they leveraged dots to do some particularly interesting things. So they... just to kind of like set the stage about, in what capacity that they're using dots and everything like that. So they're not using the entity component system. From what I understand, this game has been in development for a number of years now. And kind of their main thinking was, at least at the time, that Unity ECS was still very early on in development and likely to change. And, even though... it is kind of maybe in a better state now. Definitely when they started it was, pretty early in production, and there weren't as many resources available as there are now with all the documentation and samples and everything like that. So they're basically just using just the job system and the burst compiler, and they're kind of using game objects for just kind of like the main things happening in their game. But one particular thing that they are using the job system and burst compiler for is what you're seeing on screen right now, which is this whole flow field pathfinding setup. So if you're not familiar with a flow field pathfinding, I do actually have a couple of videos.
Yes, you do.
That was perfect timing bringing that comment up. I do have a couple of videos from back in the day about me creating some flow field pathfinding stuff. I think the video that's probably the best and most relevant one to watch is just kind of like going through like the theory of what the flow field pathfinding is, how it kind of works, and everything like that. But just to give like a quick overview, the idea is that with flow field pathfinding, you can have units basically be anywhere in the map, and they're all kind of like going towards one single point. So in this case, you'll see that all these enemy units are kind of pathfinding their way towards this castle here in the middle. So the idea here is, this flood field algorithm kind of starts, at the castle and kind of works its way out, and then it kind of weighs in the cost of like the terrain and sees if there's any obstacles in the way or things like that. And then it will basically create this flow field, which is what you're seeing now, where like any enemy can look at where they are on the map, and they know which direction they need to move at any given time that will eventually get them to the castle. Now, I do want to back this up just a little bit because they did show one kind of unique thing that they've added into their project here. So this is when they start kind of placing down some people on their team. You see how the flow field kind of changes a little bit. So there's kind of like this part of the flow field over to the left, has all of the arrows kind of moving towards this castle. But you see kind of over towards the right now, if any enemies get into this portion of the flow field, they're actually going to move towards, the players on the players team, essentially. So like, opposite of the enemies, if you will. And so this is because like the flow field can kind of like take into account like a prioritization of, say, if there's someone on the opposing team close by, I want to prioritize moving towards them instead of the castle. And then, once those enemies are defeated, then we can move towards the castle and start kind of attacking the castle. So, just kind of wanted to like kind of bring this up to kind of talk about the stream, because it was cool to see, kind of how they're using dots in production. But Danny, did you watch this stream? Did you have any kind of thoughts on, starting with the flow field stuff here?
I mean, I did actually watch it, except like 10 minutes of it at the end. I was getting home by that point. But no, I think it's a great use of dots. Obviously, it doesn't make sense for everything in a game to necessarily be easiest, but it is very nice to pick out specific parts, like a flow field and a bunch of stuff moving around and some like highly tight knitted loops, and especially stuff like this to just use dots for that specific thing.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, I don't think there's any like specific other part of this that sets it apart, other than it being cool that they use bots for this.
Yeah, I agree. It is like a fairly simple implementation of a flow field algorithm, and it's like not something that you necessarily need to get very complex and with and everything. But there definitely are ways that you can make more complex flow field algorithms where maybe you have multiple flow fields going on at one time, so that you can kind of have multiple destinations for different groups of enemies.
Did you see at one point in that video they actually have a comment that describes like the whole dependency graph of their jobs?
Oh yeah.
I did find that very interesting.
Let me see if that is easy enough to find. If I can just kind of scrub through here. Yes. But yeah, it's basically talking about all their job dependencies, right?
Yeah, it's right after the break, so I think it's somewhere close to here. I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, this is it right here.
Yeah.
So yeah, they literally just commented. Cool. Yeah, they literally just commented within their code base here. They have kind of the default dependency, and then you can see these jobs look like these can kind of all run in parallel. And then once certain jobs are completed, then the next set of jobs can run. And then you see, as they kind of, scroll over to the right here, then there's kind of like more jobs over to the right where they kind of have all their dependencies. So
Yeah,
it is
I
an
mean that's a
interesting
perfect use
documentation
of
strategy.
dots. Like I think that would be normally very annoying to figure out that dependency graph without the job system.
Right. Yeah, and the job system has been very nice, and the cases that I've needed it where, um, like there are kind of like it doing the dependency tracking of when certain data needs to be accessed. It's kind of locked it down until that job is completed, until on the next job and everything. So, but yeah. Did you have any other kind of thoughts on anything that stood out to you in this video or from the flow field or anything like that?
I don't think so. I thought it was very interesting to see. Yeah, it's a very good use of dots.
Yeah, I would agree. It would be interesting to see a game like this made with kind of ECS proper, but I do understand that the decision they made to just stick with the job system and burst compiler, because it's just
I think it was
like
back
the
in
stage of
2021 where they had to make that decision. They point out in the video.
Right. Yeah. They
Where it was definitely a different state.
yeah, certainly. Yeah, and they had kind of talked about how originally it was just all completely game object based. They didn't use any job system burst compiler or anything. And then for their pathfinding, they were actually just using the basic built-in Unity nav mesh stuff, which was okay. It's like good enough to kind of get the point across and do some prototyping and everything. But there's definitely some limitations, especially how like if you have a bunch of units pathfinding from one kind of general region to one specific point, a lot of times they're all kind of gonna like end up in like a single file line essentially, instead of like being in more of like a kind of cohesive group. And that's one thing that they were saying about using the flow fields, is they could also implement some kind of Boyd's algorithm behavior where there is
Cohesion,
kind of cohesion, separation, where they're kind of all staying within a group, moving some sort of area, and then they can kind of flow around and through different obstacles. And by the way, one of the reasons that it's important for them to use the job system is that this whole flow field is recalculated in real time. So as different obstacles are showing up on the map and different maybe higher priority targets are showing up, then all that stuff can kind of be recalculated on the fly to just kind of lead to the smoothest and most responsive gameplay experience.
Yeah, and also, did you notice all the cool debugging tools they had as well?
Yeah.
They had
a nice
some
little debug
I'm
window
GUI
down the
stuff.
bottom.
Even it looked like it looked a lot like Deer Arm GUI. I don't know how they did that.
Yeah. No, it would be interesting to learn a little bit more about their tools and everything. But I think at the beginning when they started pulling up the flow field, you can get a quick glimpse of some of these kind of windows that they popped open here, so we can see. Yeah, so you can see some of this stuff here, and it's all opening up, and they're able to kind of do
Drawing
this
the
and
cursors.
tweak some of the settings.
Oh.
What was that?
I just had a cat that pressed a button.
Nice. But yeah, anyways, I think this was a nice stream to watch. I'll go ahead and post this in the chat here, so you can all go ahead and check it out yourself if you want kind of the full context of it. They don't get super technical and like showcase any code or anything, of course, because it's a commercial product. But they do talk a lot about the theory and stuff. But
by the way, did you notice the little some of those arrows and debugging stuff actually moves around in weird ways sometimes? Like when they were showing the enemies at some point in the video, they do have some weird, like, the numbers float around the enemies. So I don't know how the what's it called, like some of the canvas stuff works. Like why would it cause all the numbers to basically be in a different perspective almost to the enemies? It's way later in the part where they show enemies in the video. But
yeah, I didn't notice that actually. Maybe we'll have to go back and check that out.
So there's something interesting for people to check out.
Exactly. Little Easter egg for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, shout out to Cataclysmo. You can go wishlist it on Steam right now. I don't remember if it had a release date. Did you know if you saw anything about a release date or anything like that?
No clue. They might have mentioned it in the last 10 minutes that I didn't watch.
Fair. All right, well, with that, we'll go ahead and move on to our instruction set. And actually, I need to rename this instruction set here because we're not doing UI Toolkit in ECS. We're in fact doing our data-oriented.
And it says Q2 24. 2024. So
thank you for that.
Not that far away.
Yeah, coming up. Okay, so we can go ahead and move over to our instruction set. And by the way, if you do have any questions that are kind of on topic, feel free to just post those in the chat as you think of them, and then we'll get to those at the end of this section here. And that is not what I wanted to do. Go ahead and share my full screen here, and this is the one here. Let's get Unity rocking and rolling.
My cat is almost laying on my keyboard. I hope it doesn't mess anything up at some point.
So yeah, if you start seeing Danny type in a bunch of random characters, well, you know why.
Yeah, it would be me. I am the one typing in random letters.
Nice. Okay, so yeah, this is the kind of damage, my data-oriented damage system that I want to be showcasing. Again, this is kind of like the foundational layer of my kind of more complex combat system that I've used in a couple of different projects. And I feel like this is going to be a really good starting point to just kind of introduce you all to some of these concepts. And then I'm thinking that the week after next is the next time that I'll be up for showcasing the main project of the week, is when I'll get into the combat system a little bit more, kind of talking about doing some more complex things with abilities and everything like that. But for the first one, I really just wanted to showcase essentially just kind of like introduce you to what the damage system is and some of the cool things that you can do with Unity ECS here. So I'll go ahead and just real quickly just kind of go through and just give you a quick overview about what's happening in this sample scene here, and then we can get into a little bit more of the code so you can get a better sense of what's happening behind the scenes here. So you see that we basically just have these three different pills here with different colored glasses, and the color of glasses represent which team that they're a part of. So we have a red one, a blue one, and a green one. And then essentially I have it set up so I can press the keys 1 through 4, which are going to spawn different attacks into the world. Right now I just have the attacks essentially applying to all the characters within the scene. But later on in kind of say the next portion where we're looking into the more kind of complex ability system, that's where we'd actually implement like, targeting and, damaging specific entities. So just for right now, they're kind of just damaging everybody within the scene. So if I can say press the number 1 key, you'll see that it kind of spawns some damage into the world, and damage has been applied to the green and the blue entities here. Now it doesn't damage the red entity. The reason for that is because these say damage elements I'm spawning into the world, they all have some kind of team association. So I'm associating all these attacks with the red team, so that's why you'll see that the red enemy is not going to take damage. Now if I say spawn a couple more of these damage elements, you'll see that the blue the blue character is taking damage at a higher rate than the green character, and that's because we have some kind of like damage multiplication on there. So we can think of, say, the green entity has kind of some sort of armor where they don't take as much physical damage as the blue one would. And then also we can go ahead and refresh their health, and then the next key here, I can just use a different type of attack that affects now the green enemy more than the blue one. So and then the last one that I want to have, the last one that I do want to showcase is I do also have a damage over time ability. So I can press it once and then you see, hands off the keyboard, but it's still kind of applying damage every, once every second or so. And one other thing that I want to point out is I am kind of doing some like damage effects. So if you look at like the, actual color of each of these players, when we're damaging them, they just kind of like flash red and then that kind of like fades out over time. So anyways, that's just kind of a little bit long-winded way to showcase this little simple project here. So I'll kind of get into a little bit of the code and showcase you what's going on. Yeah, I'll open the code first here. So we'll start with the actual damage components. So essentially the way that this works is we're going to have different structs for, say, the maximum hit points and the current hit points. I've chosen to separate these out into two separate components. Even though most often we are going to be kind of accessing these both at the same time, it just kind of makes sense to separate them out because the max hit points, we're pretty much always going to be reading from that. There's not much of a reason for us to set the max hit points, very frequently, but the current hit points, this is something that we're going to be constantly modifying. So just kind of makes sense from a data dependency standpoint to just separate those out because we're kind of accessing those for different reasons. So next up, I have a couple enums. So here's one for the damage type. So again, we can have, say, like physical damage, magic damage, poisoning, and I've also added healing as essentially a damage type. If you wanted, you could add healing as something like, kind of completely separate from damage. But for kind of simplicity's sake, I've chosen to add healing into the whole kind of, same setup. So it all kind of works the same. And then we also have a team type enum. So again, each entity and each damage element can have some team association. And then you see that we actually are, assigning this through a component. So we have our entity team, and then it just has that team type value here. So now here's where we start to get into some things that are kind of a little bit more specific to Unity ECS. So this is where we essentially create a damage buffer. The reason that we do this is because for a couple of reasons, there are a couple of different situations where, maybe one entity could take damage multiple times in one frame, from different, say, sources of damage. So it kind of makes sense for us to have a dynamic buffer, which is basically just a collection of all these damage entities, so that we can kind of, queue all those up from different places in our code base. And then later, kind of towards the end of the frame, then we'll actually have a system that runs through that damage buffer and then actually applies the damage to the entity. Damage properties, this is kind of what's associated with the actual damage entity, just to kind of like, these are the things that we're going to be setting, on the particular damage entity for it to add to this damage buffer later on. And you can see that these are just kind of the basic things where it has, some notion about, what the damage type is, what team is that damage entity associated with, and how many hit points it is. Damage over time, it's, pretty much we have the same three first ones here, but it is a little bit more because we also want to have, say, like a timer so we can actually kind of apply damage over time on some sort of interval. So I've kind of used these different timers for tracking that interval timer there, which we'll talk about later. And then here's where I have these damage multipliers. You can see that these are all just public floats. So the way that I've chosen to do this, there may be some different ways that we could do this, but I've chosen to do this with different components for these different damage multipliers. So we have just a physical damage multiplier, magic damage multiplier, and poison damage multiplier. And so basically the idea is if we have this component on there, then we would say multiply the incoming damage by this multiplier. So if the damage was 10 and then we had some armor on that makes it so it's like we only take 50% of physical damage, then we just do that multiplication, and then we figure out, what that output damage is, and I'll show you that code later on. Then we also have some companion components for doing some UI stuff. So here is the health bar UI. I've kind of talked about this type of thing before, where the idea with the cleanup components is that when this new entity is spawned, then it's going to go ahead and spawn a new health bar associated with that entity. It's going to keep it updated in the correct position in the world. And then we also have a reference to it for when we want to actually update that slider. And then finally, when our entity is destroyed, it will also go ahead and use some of the benefits of the cleanup component to actually destroy this associated game object. Do just have a health bar offset to offset that health bar just a little bit there. And then I have an enableable component for update health bar UI. Just so we're not updating the health bar every single frame. It's just only when we need it, we can just enable that component, and then it will update the health bar. And then lastly, I do have a damage flash timer here to just kind of keep track of flashing that entity red. There are a couple other things here that we'll get into a little bit later on, but those are just kind of a general overview of the components. Danny, how are we looking on things? Do you have any questions so far, or just keep rolling?
No, not so far. Just keep rolling.
Sounds
I do
good.
think some people have some interesting questions already, so I think we'll get to those later.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So yeah, anyways, so let me just go ahead and show what the authoring component looks like. So if we look at hit points authoring. So this is basically where we're just going to go ahead and define, all these variables within the editor. So of course we have our max hit points. We can set what team the entity is on. And then what I've done here is actually have Booleans and floats for our different damage multiplications. So you'll see that I have, a public bool for multiply physical damage. And then so basically if that's checked in the editor, then it's going to add the physical damage multiplier component, and it's going to set the value that we have assigned here. So I've done that same thing for the physical damage, magic damage, and poison damage. Of course, we can set the health bar UI offsets and the flash timer here, and then we'll get to this one later. But you can see that basically inside the baker, we're doing just pretty basic things about adding the components that we need. And then here's where we can do a little bit of logic where we can say if the authoring dot multiply physical damage, then we'll go ahead and add that physical damage multiplier here. So I can kind of demonstrate this in action here. If we come over to Unity, you can see when we have, let me make this a little wider. If we have the multiply physical damage, we can go ahead and check mark this. And then now we can look kind of down in our entity baking preview. We should be able to see the physical damage multiplier somewhere down here. Yes, so we have the physical damage multiplier right here, and we can see the value is set to 0.5. And then if we uncheck that, then that component is no longer present in this sort of area here. So again, just kind of like going back to the separation of these different entities. So we have the blue entity. This entity is just taking just kind of the regular damage because we have these boxes all unchecked here. However, the green entity, this one has the boxes for physical damage and magic damage checked. So you can see that physical damage, it takes just 0.5, basically 50% of damage. And then the magic damage multiplier is 2, so it takes double damage from magic. So again, we can go here, and then if I'm dealing physical damage, you can see that the blue one is, basically more affected, and the green one is less affected. And then if we do magic damage, then again, now the green one is basically taking double damage. So let's actually get into how this damage is being dealt. And first, I'm just going to real quickly showcase the Q damage system. I'm going to say don't pay too much attention to the particular details of how I'm kind of setting things up in here. because again, this is most likely going to be replaced by, say having multiple systems in your game. That's like, if you're like looking at like collision events or just kind of other ways that you're applying damage throughout your code base. That's kind of what this is going to be replaced by. However, in this case, what I'm doing is I'm just kind of like, creating a damage entity and then just applying this to all entities that can take damage essentially. So you can see, basically just kind of what I'm doing here is, just creating these new damage entities. We're going to add a component data to it, which is just these damage properties. And then here I'm just manually setting, say we're dealing physical damage. It's going to be a part of the red team. And then for 10 points, when I press the 2 key, this one is going to deal basically 2 unique damages of physical entity on the same frame. So that's how we can kind of test that our dynamic buffer is working. Because, so it's like, again, taking damage from 2 sources in one frame. Whereas if we didn't have that buffer and then we're just setting the data directly, we wouldn't necessarily be able to do this similar kind of setup, I guess.
I do have just one slight comment, which is
yeah.
Which version? First and foremost, which version of entities are you
on? Good question. I thought 1.2.
Because if you are on 1.2, there's another. I'm pretty sure by this point, me and a colleague added another API, which means what you're doing here can actually be bursted. Because right now you have some very unburstable code.
Yeah, 1.2.
Yeah, you're 1.2. Because you're creating the entity and then immediately adding a component to it. So you're creating an archetype and then immediately moving to a separate archetype, instead of just creating the correct entity up front and then setting the damage properties, which is generally recommended. But yeah, that's my main comment. Also, the reason I'm asking for the version is that in entities 1.2, I think it was at that version we added it, you can do create entity and then pass in component type. You can actually try it with one of them. Instead of the type of, do stack alloc. Yeah, and then say component type, I think it is. Yeah, and then square braces.
Square braces or
yeah,
angle braces?
And then directly after curly braces. Yeah, and then you can say component type dot damage destroy entity tag, I guess it is. Read only, read write. That doesn't matter which one you pick. Yeah, and then you can pick the other component type as well. You can do commas in between.
So then we could do like this, and then component type dot. Do another read only for damage properties, and then
yes,
here then what you want me to do is system API set component.
Yeah, there you go.
Look at that.
And now you've set up the archetype correctly up front, and not only that, this is also burstable. The other thing was not burstable because you were using type of and a managed array, whereas stack alloc is just a pointer and therefore completely valid.
Awesome.
So this is burstable, and it's
very helpful.
Not a archetype change.
Sweet.
But otherwise, now you can go on, and people can repeat this pattern for every case where they see a create entity and then an add component. Ideally, people shouldn't be doing create entity, then adding XYZ.
Fair.
They should be just setting it up correctly up front and then start setting a bunch of stuff.
Nice. I like that a lot. Cool. Well, I would definitely be using that more. So yeah, anyways, getting back to what I'm doing here. So yeah, again, I did see a comment in there about creating like damageable entities. And I think that actually, it may seem a little bit kind of counterintuitive at first, but there's some really cool things that we can do with it. And I think particularly when we get into kind of the ability system stuff, which we'll be showcasing the week after next, You can see why it is kind of helpful to have like an entity associated with these different things that we can add different components to, and that the existence of having those components, it can kind of change the behaviors. So we can have certain systems affect entities when we have particular components, and then we can change that around, and other systems will impact them, so then they can do things in a different way. So it just gives us a lot of flexibility, and all our code isn't kind of tied together in nasty ways, and we can kind of just kind of plug and play and have fun with our game design and everything. So anyways, now that we have a more efficient damage entity creation, we can see what we're going to go ahead and do here is, I just do nested for each loops here, just looking for anything with those damage properties, essentially these damage entities that we just created. You see the variable name is cur damage properties. And then inside this for loop, then in this case, we're looking through all those damage entities that we just created. Again, in most cases, there's just going to be one, but in those edge cases where I'm saying creating multiple per frame, that's why we would want to actually iterate through this. And again, just kind of sticking with the ECS pattern of us preferring iterating over things rather than doing things one off. This is why we're using a for each on this collection here. So then on the inner loop, now here's where we actually loop across all the entities that can receive damage. So again, in this case, this is just those 3 entities within our main scene. And you see that we're just looking for the dynamic buffer of these damage buffer elements. And then so we just get a reference to our damage buffer here. And then you see we just add these new damage buffer elements to the damage buffer. And all we're doing is just setting the damage type, damage team, and hit points. And again, we're just getting those from the cur damage properties of that damage entity that we're iterating across. So again, we'll iterate through all those damageable entities. Inside that loop, we'll iterate across all the entities that can take damage. And then we're just adding the damage buffer to them. And you see, at this point, we're not doing any like pre-filtering for, checking for friendly fire or anything like that. We're just adding this damage buffer, or we're just adding this damage element to this buffer. And then we can kind of handle the cases like friendly fire and things like that later on. So basically what this does is this just kind of, again, queues up these damage elements. And what I can actually probably do is I'm just going to go ahead and disable my applied damage system. It's about doing a disable auto creation here. And then what I can kind of show you is when we actually spawn these damage entities, you can just see these all just get queued up in the damage buffer here. So I'll go ahead and spawn a damage entity. And if we say, look at this player here, you can see we can scroll down to this damage buffer element buffer, and we have just one element on here. And you'll see that it is, physical damage on the red team for 10 hit points. And then all the players basically have this same data here. So it's, again, not doing any pre-filtering based off of team. It's not modifying this hit points based off of, if they have armor on or anything like that. And then again, if we say, spawn another one, which is, say, the magic damage, then you can see this on here. And then if we also do the damage over time one, then we can see that it'll, add a couple more of these elements for, poison there. So that is kind of the basics of, just adding to this damage buffer. And then the final kind of stage of this is actually applying the damage. So what this does here is this is a little bit, longer and a little bit more involved here, just because we have to start to take into consideration, some of those different damage multipliers and things like that that we're adding in here. So in our for each here, we're going to look for, we need read and write access to the current hit points, because again, at the end, this is where we're, actually modifying the hit points value. We do also want a reference to our max hit points. So we can say, if we like are refilling our health, we don't want to go like over the maximum, of course. Our damage buffer is, that buffer that we're just populating. And of course, we want a reference to the entity team so we can take into account friendly fire and all that. We do need our entity access here so we can kind of do a couple things. So we can like check to see what components it has and stuff like that. And then the filter right group, I'll get into that kind of at the end. So what I'm doing here is I just am doing a looping through everything in the damage buffer. And then here we're just going to do a switch on the damage type. So we can see, you know, if it's physical damage, first thing that we want to do is just ignore friendly fire. So then we can say, you know, if the value of the entity team is equal to the team of the damage element, then just go ahead and ignore friendly fire here. So this is again where we're doing our kind of pre-filtering. And then here's where we can actually calculate our physical hit points. So we just get that from our damage element, the hit points on here. And then using the system API, we can do a .has component and check to see if it has that physical damage multiplier component there. And then, of course, we just have to pass in the actual entity that we want to see if that is on. And then, you know, once we have that, we can get the actual damage multiplier using our system API.get components. And then here is where we just do that multiplication by taking in the existing physical hit points, multiplying that by our physical damage multiplier, and then assigning that back to our physical hit points. And then at this point, all I'm doing is just kind of like adding this to a damage hit point variable. So you can see that I have, say, damage hit points, and then I also down here have healing hit points. The reason that I've chose to do it this way is because if we're taking, say, damage and healing on the same frame, we don't necessarily want those to like counteract each other too much, I guess. So like maybe if we like healed ourselves by some amount and then we're taking damage by some amount, there could be some weird situations where, you know, the things wouldn't line up correctly, or if we, let's say, like applied healing first, but, you know, that healing pushed us past the maximum value, but then we also took damage. Like it just kind of made sense in my mind to store these as variables, and then we can kind of combine the, damage hit points as well as the healing hit points to get kind of like a final value for that frame, if that makes sense. So anyways, and then of course we'll just do the same thing for the different damage types and healing types. For healing, the only difference is we'll do the opposite of friendly fire, so you can only heal from the same team essentially. One thing that we do want to make sure to do is clear our damage buffer, because we only want these damage elements kind of applying on this particular frame. This is where I do just kind of like calculate the total hit points for that frame there. And then this is where I actually, set the value on the current hit points. And then we also just want to make sure it doesn't go above the maximum here. And here's where we can do some just additional checks to see, if current hit points is less than 0, we'll add a destroy entity tag on there. If you have a health bar, let's go ahead and set the component enabled on the update health bar UI. So we'll actually go ahead and prompt the UI system to update that health bar. And then, then this one, it says, basically if we're taking negative damage in a frame, then this is where I basically prompt the damage flash timer to essentially reset itself, so that you can kind of apply a little damage flash to that there. Okay, so now I can just kind of come back here, and actually pretty much nothing has really changed at this point, but I can just kind of give you a quick little visual where, again, if we're applying damage, it's going to apply, the damage that we're setting there. And again, we can kind of come in here, and we can say, let's go on this entity, and let's say this one will multiply its physical damage by 5 would be a lot, but whatever, we'll just make it, real obvious. So, if we deal physical damage now, it takes half its health. And of course, when it goes below 0, then it actually gets destroyed here. And then what I can also show you is we can do something a little bit more complex by using a concept known as right groups. So what I have here is a tag for the ignore damage multiplication tag. And you see that this has an attribute for the right group, and it's targeting the type of current hit points. The idea with this is if we have a system such as the apply damage system, which fits two requirements, the two requirements being we are writing to the current hit points, again, which is that the right group that we're targeting. This is why it's called the right group, is if we're writing to that component type. And we also do have this with options of entity query options dot filter right group enabled. What this means is if a entity with this ignore damage multiplication tag component exists, then it will not it will no longer be impacted by this query that we're generating here. So the idea is that we can essentially override the behavior. So again, I call this the ignore damage multiplication tag. So then we have so that it no longer does our regular apply damage system, but instead we can say, hey, if we add this tag component, we can maybe apply damage in a completely different way. So for example, I have this apply unscaled damage system where it just basically does a much simpler implementation where it doesn't have to do all that checking to see, hey, does it have, this multiplication component and then do that multiplication. It just applies the damage directly. So now if I were to say, come over to here, and then on this player, even though it has the multiply physical damage and we have physical damage multiplier set to 5x, let's go ahead and add that should ignore damage multiplication, and then you see it will add that component down here. So now when we apply physical damage, it's just going to apply just the regular one-time scaled. It doesn't apply 5x scaled anymore. So that's something that, kind of cool that you can do is you can say, hey, we have this kind of regular apply damage system, but maybe there are some cases where I want to apply damage in a completely different way. Maybe I want to, have a mode of my game where I'm ignoring friendly fire. In that case, you could, create a new system where it applies damage and then it, ignores those friendly fire restrictions on there. And you could, again, just have some like tag that you could add to your entities to say, hey, ignore friendly fire. Or maybe even as we get into the kind of more complex ability system, you can have damage elements that when a player gets hit by something, then it will add a component to them so that now damage is calculated in a different way. So definitely like a lot of cool stuff there. So that's kind of like a good overview about kind of how this damage system is set up. Danny, do you have any questions before we get into the questions from the audience? But is there anything that you kind of have for me or anything that you want to learn a little bit more about?
I don't think I have anything. I'm personally not a big fan of filter right groups just because I think they're overcomplicated, and in most cases you could just do it with none. But other than that,
Makes sense.
I think it's good that you explained what a filter right group is, because it is something that most people don't quite know what is.
Yeah. I think they're interesting, and I think there are some cases where they're useful. But yeah.
Oh, and also I did notice your allocator.temp, which is often it can be better to just use state.world.update allocator because it's a rewindable allocator. So it's a little bit quicker.
For like the entity command buffer?
Yeah.
State.world update allocator. All right.
Exactly. Yeah. There you go.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, I will go ahead.
That one gets it is like a back buffer to buffer approach where every frame it switches between one buffer and the other, and so after 2 frames it has been cleared, and for the most part already pre-allocated.
It's like a dual clutch. It's like a dual clutch transmission.
Yeah. Or like how vsync works. Vsync is normally also like a double buffered approach.
Gotcha.
Where you write to the back texture while the front texture is shown, and then you flip. Yeah. So, anyways, I think it's time for the question.
Sweet. Yeah. Let's get into the buffer. Speaking of buffers, we have some questions buffered up here. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into them. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I think there was one where someone asked, is there a... Oh, there, I can show them. Is there a damage type that doesn't ignore friendly fire? Just an easy one to start with.
Yeah. So yeah, that kind of tags off of, something that I just mentioned about, us being able to use the right groups to, again, say, add a tag where I would basically just, come to these damage components and, I could just say, copy this, and then we would say, ignore friendly fire tag. And then in that case, we would have to create a new system that, applies the damage in here, but then we would just, not include this one line check.
Yeah. And there's also someone is asking for like different approaches on like how you can do healing as well. Like you could also think of healing as just taking damage in reverse.
Right. So that's, kind of what I did here, in a sense, is that...
Yeah, you had some part where you were like positive.
Because we have the, damage buffer element, and healing is kind of being added to this damage buffer. Another approach that you could take to this if you wanted is you could have like a separate damage buffer and a separate healing buffer if you wanted. For this case, it just made the most sense to kind of put them all through the damage buffer. And then again, the reason that I'm just kind of separating these out here with the damage hit points and healing hit points is so later on when we're doing some of like the UI stuff, like I can see if, we're taking negative damage for the frame, and if we're like taking damage, then I can go ahead and like enable this damage flash timer to, get that little flash UI. And actually, this just might be a cool thing to show off here to people as well. So I have this damage flash effect system. The way this works is we use that damage flash timer, and then we use the URP material property base color. What this allows us to do is it allows us to essentially override the color for our material, so that you can see here we have a basic white material, but then when we go ahead and actually set the value on here, we can go ahead and say change this to all red at first, and then it kind of fades back into white is essentially what I'm doing here.
Yeah, well, I guess one thing to be aware of is if you're making your own shaders, there's like a little property you do have to put in there to say, hey, this shader has overridden properties per instance.
Right.
Which is like a funny quirk that most people don't realize.
Yeah. So there is, like obviously I didn't create these shaders, but yeah, you can see that there's kind of just the basic ones. I believe it's just this base map. There's kind of this like base color.
And I think at the bottom
here,
it has like a advanced option. Oh yeah, you don't even know.
Because this isn't.
this is the default one. Yeah. But whenever you create your own, there is like a setting that you have to enable, and it's very annoying.
I have definitely missed it a time or two.
Yeah. Also, someone asks, why didn't you make like a generic component instead? And then wouldn't it be more flexible to use a generic multiply component with a damage type property?
Yeah, that's kind of something that I was hinting at, is like maybe there is kind of like a better way about going about doing this so you don't have like, all this repeated code. But I don't know, I kind of like to get your take on this to see if, if you think that there is kind of a better or more appropriate way that I could do something like this, that is maybe more generic, or maybe even...
Well, normally the way that I do stuff like this is not even to turn it... There's like two ways to think of generic stuff, and one of them is just before even going generic, you can usually just try to make your data generic. So like instead of having a physical damage multiplier and a magic damage multiplier and a poison damage multiplier, you just have a damage multiplier, and inside there's an enum, and then you switch between those.
Yeah.
And then you can obviously just like you would probably, if you need to have multiple of them, make them an eye buffer element instead to make that work.
That is definitely an option, but it gets kind of weird because now you have to like, iterate through the buffer and
That's usually not too bad to iterate through a buffer. The problem with this kind of approach to me is it very quickly turns into, oh, now I need a fourth component, and then I have a fifth component, and then my editor tooling also becomes like this expanded thing where okay, for every single place that in my authoring workflow, I now have to add the damage poison
bool and the float,
exactly,
and then do the if check.
Yeah, whereas it would be a lot nicer if it was just a buffer where you say, hey, for this particular scenario, I want it to be damage of this and with this other one, and then you just add to a buffer with just a list of my items. That's usually the kind of approach I take. Also because a switch statement is so easy to make. I don't have to write a bunch of boilerplate iComponent data. I can just switch between what I want. And then at some point, I might need to change that because whatever reason. But at that point, I will usually, have written more code or more of the project, and then I will do the refactor at that point. That's usually I've stated that in a few other streams as well at this point. I always, wait as long as I can with the refactor, but not too long.
That makes sense.
I see as it goes.
And then, but I guess that doesn't really cut too much down on like your editor tooling, right? You would still kind of need to have some of those like if else checkboxes and stuff, right?
Well, the thing is, you could at that point just have a like a what's it called? Just an array, and then that array is just a bunch of like this enum poison attack of this value.
Just elements of the array, and then that way, then it would just yeah. It's a good point.
Then you could even have like multiple poison effects or something.
Right.
It's a very easy, flexible approach that also has a nice authoring workflow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. You could have different like pieces of armor and like some reduced damage by some points or whatever, and
let's go through the list.
Sounds good to me.
Someone asked, so we create entities for take damage. This ECS is so weird.
yeah, I agree. Yeah, I addressed this one a little bit during the actual main portion of the video, but again, I do think that there are a lot of benefits of us creating damage entities. In this case, there are pretty simplistic. They're just kind of carrying little bits of data, but again, it does kind of like make sense that we can have kind of a lot of these different properties that we keep track of on here, and maybe we get to the case where we're creating damage entities that have much more than just these three basic things, and it doesn't make sense to have all the additional things beyond this same component. Maybe these can be different components, so then we can have that one entity that has a reference to all those different components, for us to give a little bit more flexibility about how we're dealing damage. And one thing that I do want to point out that I kind of forgot to mention at the beginning is even though I am using this for a damage system right now, these kind of like same basic theories could be applied to a whole bunch of different things. Like you could have maybe like if you had a bunch of like NPCs in a game, a lot of these same principles can be used to calculate their different like stats. Maybe they have like energy levels and hunger levels and things like this, that are all kind of constantly being in flux, and then the outputs of these different status levels that they have, these can all be essentially used to determine what their logic is about what they're going to be what their kind of highest priority is at any given time. So there's a lot more things that you can do with this than just a damage system, but I do think just using a damage system is an easy way to kind of showcase these basic principles.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of reminded of like a Cataclysm where like they have the whole like nice navigation system set up where it's a bunch of like jobs running up against other jobs. The thing about this sort of approach, it also helps you being able to say, hey, by this point we expect everything to have a certain amount of damage properties, a certain amount of like this thing, and then they can like start processing. Like it definitely enables you to say more easily, hey, I just want to set up all this beforehand, and then at some point I'm gonna process it. Like you put it into process steps almost.
Right.
Like a baker. Like you have one, in a kitchen. There's a bunch of different people. Like in a chef's kitchen at a restaurant, there's a bunch of different people. All
kitchen.
Exactly. Yeah. Some are cutting the vegetables. Some are putting soup, making soups. And in this way, there's the damage properties, and that sort of helps. Anyways, I think we should go to the next question.
Sounds good.
What is this one? What is the best mechanism when entities need to keep track of other entities, and how to handle destruction? Like tracking a bullet to follow the target and to know when to stop if a target died.
Yeah, so this is something that I think we'll get into a little bit more in depth in kind of the next portion of my combat system. But essentially, you can just to answer your question here, you can essentially have like an entity reference, and then using component lookups, you can basically look up where that entity is at any given time. So you can have a component that says hey, what is the entity that I'm targeting? And then you can basically just have a system that says, looking at that target entity, go to that entity and get its transform off of it. And then I can kind of navigate towards that. The one thing that you do need to be careful with in that case is, essentially anytime that you're doing a lookup like that, it's going to be a random lookup. So it's going to be, you're looking at data that's most likely going to be in another chunk, which is somewhere else in memory. Which is still going to be pretty quick because it's kind of in memory and you're not like loading something off the hard disk or whatever, but it's not likely to be in the CPU cache, so it is going to be a little bit slower than just getting it from the CPU cache. So it's something that you should try to do not in large quantities extremely frequently.
Yeah. And I mean, you can also use, for instance, when you want to stop tracking something, you could have like an I cleanup component data to say, hey, when this entity no longer exists, like the bullet stopped tracking stuff, then hey, remove the entity off of this entity that is trying to follow it.
That's a good point.
Like
yeah,
it is completely valid to have one character's. Let's say you have a enemy and the enemy is following the player. Then when that enemy spawns, it's likely that you've already set it as the follow target on the actual enemy. It is set to the player. Then at some point, there might be a cleanup component that says, hey, I'm trying to clean up the player. And then that tells a system, hey, you should go and find all enemies and make sure that they don't have the player. Stuff like that. It's expensive at the point where, the player dies at that point. So it does depend on your game. But I cleanup components can definitely help with this sort of scenario as well.
Yeah.
I see a question that is repeated. Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to bring this one up real quick. Again, this is going to be something that I'm going to be going into a little bit more in depth when we kind of talk about the abilities, targeting, and everything like that. But yeah, typically I can use like a raycast or some type of collision events, and then again through that you can get a reference to that whatever entity was hit in that case, and kind of store that as a reference to whatever entity you're targeting. But again, I'll get into this a little bit more in depth in I think about 2 weeks here.
Yes. And someone is asking for our thoughts on a redux or events approach to taking damage. Example, given there's a type to damage, and it's a physical type of damage with 123 damage physical taken, and then the system is the reducer. So I guess it then tries to like pop off almost like a queue, take away. I mean, I feel like that depends on the sort of game you're making. When does this make sense? Because like, if you're making, I don't know, Plant versus Zombies, chances are that would be highly flexible. Like it's just a pea shooter shoots a thing, and then it already knows that it's only going to be in one row, and then it's going to shoot the thing, and then it's going to say, hey, you hit this with a pea, and it's a cold item, so it wasn't that hot, so it's not going to cause extra damage. Like, I guess it depends on your game. Some games, it's going to be better. Yeah, I feel like this approach only really works well if you have a game where the complexity is in the different combinatorial setups. Like a zombie needs to figure out whether or not the fire attack combined with the elemental attack combined with the other thing is gonna react a certain way.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, seems like something interesting to look into a little bit at least. I'm gonna pull this one up from Walter here. So the buffer can also be used for damage over time. So actually damage over time, I'm doing this a little bit differently. I'm not taking advantage of the damage buffer for that. I'll show you what I have here. It's the Q damage over time system. So essentially we're doing the same thing where we're creating a damage prefab. However, this time I'm not immediately adding the destroy entity tag to it like I was in the previous ones, because again, those are just entities that essentially just exist for that one frame and apply the damage. But what I'm doing here is I just kind of have like a timer here on these entities. And then for every entity that exists that has this damage over time properties, we're just going to go ahead and kind of like update that timer. If the timer is below 0, we'll destroy the entity. Otherwise, you can see here we're like checking it against the next hit time, and then we're just like updating that hit time based off of whatever hit interval that we've defined here. So it's just kind of like an entity exists. Again, if we were doing this where it like, targeted some entities or something like that, we could have reference to the entities that we're, actually adding damage to. But again, in this case, I'm just applying it to all entities that essentially can take damage. And you can see that we're just doing the same thing of just applying the damage type, damage team, and hit points. So that's kind of how I'm doing the damage over time there.
Yeah, and I'm also noticing we had the topic last week on like when should you use an entity command buffer. And this is actually one of the perfect usages of an entity command buffer, because this is like once in a while, it's going to add the destroy entity tag. And therefore, my main loop is still very fast because it doesn't have to, queue up a native list every time. Yeah, it only pays the occasional cost.
Right.
But the loop is still going to be tight. It's not going to pay, a cost of having to add this component to a ton of entities, because you're not doing it every frame. You're only doing it occasionally. And you're already on track with the world update allocator. Nice. This is a great usage of an entity command buffer.
Okay. And this one, a little bit off topic, but it's still something that would be interesting to address. But what types of situations would you actively want to avoid dots in ECS? Do you have any kind of quick ones that come?
Well, now you're asking someone who's very opinionated and also biased. I'm highly biased.
I wonder why.
No, I do think there's a difference between saying dots and ECS here. There are definitely moments where you should avoid ECS. ECS doesn't fit every single problem, but I do think a lot of approaches can take advantage of dots And there really isn't any approach where dots can't be used unless it, it gets into the territory of where you currently can't use dots. You can't use it for animation quite yet. You can't use it for, I don't know, UI. UI is a classic example of where, stay away from dots. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to stay away from data-oriented design. If your main point in a game needs to be, highly changing UI, maybe look into DRM GUI. DRM GUI is a nice API that, is written in C and therefore can work well with Burst, and therefore you can actually probably very easily implement it into Unity and then still get the benefits of dots, but only if you need that performance. I'm also of the opinion that generally a lot of games can, be written as ECS, even if, but as long as they don't, you don't try actively to turn it into entities and components and buffers and all this. Like, the nice part is just to use a native array or to be able to very quickly render a bunch of entities or stuff like that. Like,
get a little bit smarter with your memory allocation and usage and everything.
Not even that, like also just being able to, do the simplest possible thing of, hey, I want to get all my plants in my game. I can just query for it. Something you normally can't do with the game object approach. Yeah, I do think that right now, the classic one. Oh yeah, that's a technical use for animation, and that is true. But yeah, no, the main point is just today it's going to be hard for games that heavily rely on code that is managed like the UI system, like animation. I don't think there's anything inherently about the ECS system that makes it so that you can't write a game in it and it still take benefit from being written in entities. I think as long as you make the game in entities, if you're planning to use entities for your game, you have to know that you shouldn't write it all as entities code. You should write it as maybe a native array or something else. Like almost go back to like grassroots programming.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
That's kind of my view on it. I'm again very biased. But I also, like using stuff like Raylib and Odin and other languages where, just being able to quickly write something and see it work.
Integrate nicely with base Unity.
Yeah. Well, even in a non-Unity context, I like being able to write code and immediately be able to see the results of writing that code.
Oh, yeah. Sure, definitely.
Without a lot of setup. Where, yeah. And that to be is the benefit of dots.
And,
yeah. Because in dots, a lot of the time, you, especially the entities framework, you can just do there's not many things hidden from you. A system just runs the system. It doesn't cost the garbage collection of a whole game object set up with mono behaviors on it, and
yeah. No, I definitely, I'd say I probably prefer using ECS now just because I use it so much. But there definitely is something to it is slower to kind of prototype things out. Like even when I was just making this kind of sample project last night, it was just a lot of writing code before anything was really happening on screen. Which I think, in my case, because I know what I'm doing, is totally fine. I can just kind of jam out these, a couple hundred lines of code or whatever it was, and then, flip back over to Unity and everything just kind of falls into place and works, but it's not regular Unity where you can just kind of drag things in. Things are immediately happening. You're getting nice, good wins, and you can kind of see that progression. And I think even you see in this netcode for entities, this big netcode for entities tutorial that I'm working on, it's a lot of writing code and long stretches of it where, we don't see a whole lot of progress happening on the screen just because we're, just going through writing these, many components and systems and getting the authoring components all hooked up together and everything. But on the other side, once a lot of that stuff is created, things just kind of like fall into place in really nice ways. I can kind of like reuse components. Like you'll see that I do this in the Netcode for Entities tutorial. I reuse components. So like, I had this kind of like, it's a MOBA game, and there's kind of like towers that essentially attack the, units on the opposing team. And then so I kind of like, implemented all that. And then later on in the tutorial, when I went to implement, creating minions that actually spawn and run around, well, it uses that exact same code for targeting entities and, firing, different spells at them and stuff. So, once I have those, base minions in place, I can just add the component to those minions, and all the targeting and attacking for them just completely works. It just falls right into place. It's awesome.
But yeah, it's so nice. I think also, I think this general answer is also going to change over time is my main point. Like, I think right now, because animation and so on doesn't work, it's not going to be very simple to do anything. But at some point, like, things will just work nicely with each other. And then, the nice thing about dots in general is the fact that it's more bare bones. You don't have all these, things getting in the way, like, a game object is always awoken in this specific order, always calls this specific way, all these like side effects that normally happen in the game. Like to anyone that has ever programmed in a more simple engine like XNA or Raylib or SDL or any of the like very simple frameworks, it's usually very nice that you can just like put in a debugger and it just does the debugging directly. And you put in, a draw a square in the middle of the screen, and it immediately draws a square in the middle of the screen. There's no, setup involved. It's just very direct. Oh, I think that was me. So I think that will get easier over time, and that's when I would more recommend using dots for even the simple games. And also if you're that type of programmer that just likes that style of code. And we got some interesting questions. And also statements, because I've watched this one. This is a good video.
Yeah, I have too. I just pulled it up and posted it in the chat right now. It is a really good video. Just kind of, Jason Booth. He's one of the very popular asset store publisher. He does all the was it Microsplat? Is that what it's called? All the terrain stuff and everything like that.
I can't remember. I just know he's a very well-known name.
Yeah. And then, he did a good video about a year ago talking about some practical optimizations and, just kind of talks about like, being smart and making good decisions with your code and, being able to look at it in good ways. And again, not necessarily using full ECS, but just kind of, just not doing dumb things, I guess.
Yeah, like creating an arch stripe just to immediately throw it out and switching component.
Well, hey, guilty.
Nah, I think we all are. Anyways, especially before, it was annoying to do that, actually. You would have to like set up a native array and then cast it into another type. Just is there a scenario, maybe simple mechanic games, where you would recommend a fully dots job system native arrays from scratch without any ECS? I've one game comes to mind, Vampire Survivors. That style of game is bunch of entities, moves around, and shoots a thing.
And it doesn't even need to be without ECS.
Yeah, no, but I have to specify here. When I say entity, the simplest version of an entity doesn't actually have to be, a full archetype chunk, etc. approach. It can just be an array of structures approach where, you have a component called my enemies, and that one has a native array in it, and it's not an iComponent data. When I say component, I just mean it's just a piece of data.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah,
but do you think the ease of development would be more difficult going that way than just using Unity ECS?
That again, that depends on your workflow. If you're working with, what is that library called? There's a sprite one.
Oh, Nsprite?
Nsprite. That one has, doesn't it have a way of batch drawing a bunch of objects?
I think so. I don't have a whole lot of experience with it, but I'm sure.
Yeah, because the thing is, in a lot of other simpler arraylib and so on, it is so much easier to read code that just say, hey, draw 10 objects on the screen on these positions, and that's it. And we, I don't know. I hope we get to a point where that is possible, where we can just say, hey, with this native array, just draw all these positions here.
Yeah, no, it's funny. This kind of reminds me of just some of like the things that I've been like hearing like people like Jonathan Blow and Casey Muratori talking about. It's like in this day and age, it's so difficult to just like draw a single pixel on a screen. Like you have to interface with all these APIs and create some like application wrapper, and it's like I just want to make this one pixel on this screen red.
Yeah. And to me, a game like Vampire Survivors is just, it's such a simple game in a way. It's literally just, draw a bunch of things at these locations. And it doesn't need the whole bells and whistles of a full-blown entity setup. Another game that actually doesn't use entities at all is Dyson Sphere. Do you know Dyson Sphere program?
Yeah.
They have their whole entire setup. It's really cool to look at. I don't know if there's probably someone who has decompiled a project. I know a ton of people who have looked into that, and it's so cool. But it's not entities. It's it's a bunch of arrays. It's a bunch of like simple systems. It just requires that you have set up something that draws it in a native array approach. Often that's the problem you're gonna have with these styles of games. A Plant vs Zombies would also be a good simple mechanic game for this native array job system approach. Yeah.
Or tower defense game even.
I mean, at that point, you might still want some, entity offering. Like the towers would be nice to have, like a bigger offer. The tower themselves be entities, but maybe the enemies are not entities. They're just shooting in a field of a bunch of positions, and then you check against you have a system API query that loops over every tower, and then they look up in a spatial query type structure, where is all my enemies, and they can just find the closest thing to shoot. And that spatial structure that you make, it can in the simplest form just be a native array of all the enemies, but it could also have been and their positions, by the way, but it could also just be like a full spatial query structure, but that would also be like a native array approach again, because you don't want to set up offering for every one of those entities. That's going to take a while, especially if you just want to debug all your enemies coming at you into a one tower, and that your tower can shoot.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we'll just take one more question here before we can start to wrap things up here. But on the topic of Nsprites, do you recommend using entities for 2D games right now? For example, competitive fighting game. Unity physics is definitely better for determinism, but focused on 3D.
I don't know. I guess that depends on the fighting game, I suppose. Oh my god! Okay, I think my cat just.
Cat's messing with all your tech today. Oh no, we lost your audio. Wait. Are you? No, we don't got you. All right. Well, you can figure that out. I can maybe comment on this a little bit. So yeah, the thing is with the Unity physics, of course, as you've noticed, there's no 2D necessarily tools for anything like that. And even like just kind of like rendering things, you see that there's only really third-party libraries available, like Nsprite. Again, Unity doesn't have anything necessarily out of the box on that. And then, yeah, again, it depends on exactly what you're looking for out of a competitive fighting game. Like you mentioned, determinism is an important thing to you. I think that's definitely a good advantage. And especially if you want to maybe integrate with some type of netcode as well. I think probably this seems to be like a possible good candidate for a netcode for entities. Even though you're not necessarily syncing large amounts of data across large numbers of entities, you still kind of want a lot of that. Some of the features that netcode for entities offers, such as like the client prediction and simulated rollback and things of that nature, which seems to kind of lend itself well towards the competitive fighting games. Dani, are you back?
I hope. Can you hear me?
I hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. Yeah, no, my cat also decided to turn off my machine, so that was fun.
All right.
She's back to being in front of my keyboard. It's all fine. I hope you answered that question really well. I could not hear a single thing.
Well, we'll just say I did. Do you have anything else to add on that?
Well, I don't know what to add. I wasn't here. I think my main point is just, physics doesn't necessarily work for every style of game. Sometimes it makes more sense to just make your own physics. But
yeah, I would agree.
I think in the game I showed last week, that one has a bunch of slimes moving around. There's actually no physics in it. It's just manually moving around.
Right.
But for a fighting style game, you might still want physics. In which case, it's gonna be a little harder. If it's like 2.5D, sure, then it can make sense. But I also don't know the performance of Box 2D. Last I recall, it was okay-ish. And Box 2D certainly you could implement with Burst.
Just like the regular Unity Box 2D.
I was talking about I guess our API does use Box 2D under the hood for the 2D physics, but I was actually talking about if you go, find the GitHub for Box 2D.
Oh, okay, I got you.
The actual binaries, because the thing is, the physics system for 2D is not a Dutch one, but Box 2D, because it is a native, physics library. Any native library can, easily be used with bursts. So that's actually my main point. Is just that I think Box 2D also could maybe be used for that.
Cool. Sounds good to me. Well, we can go ahead and get into our last kind of main segment here, the dynamic allocation. This is where we have our fun things to share with the community. So, Dani, what are you going to be sharing with us this week?
Well, let's hope the window is still open and wasn't closed by my cat.
Good point. And
if not,
then I can go first if you need it.
No, I found it actually. Share screen, entire window. Hopefully, I'm expertly sharing the correct one. Yes, which it seems I am. I'll put it on stage. Oh, you did it for me. Yes, I'm just gonna highlight this guy called Scott Daley.
Yeah.
He's quite the active dude in the ECS community, and he's working on a very cool-looking ECS game. Growing up, I was always a big fan of Minecraft. It kind of started my whole programming career, and one of my favorite mods in Minecraft was called Buildcraft and Industrial Craft. There's all these craft names in there, but they were all based around this concept of factories and building factories. And conveyor belts and stuff like that. And then, Factorio came out, which was kind of inspired by that. I think that was the inspiration source from what I recall.
Oh, interesting.
And then, it became its whole genre of Satisfactory and this. So I think it's really cool to see games being built on dots that are, this style of game. And it's very much a dot style game. And he also, I will highlight, has a cool little devlog that people can go and read through.
Yeah, I've been meaning to read through this. Because he is using ECS in the game, right?
He is using ECS in his game. A lot of entities. You can also, actually, if we quickly press block, and then we look at something like, what was a good example? I think there was some UI stuff in here. Destructible wrapping, mining, smelting, launching, tool build. There was something about him having the ability to debug, which I found very cool. Because it does sometimes show code. Oh yeah, here it is. Look at that I component data of a clock. And then, he's added his own little debug menu attribute and a min-max slider so that he can have this little menu in-game.
Oh, nice.
For debugging.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's my highlight. Scott Daley. Awesome. Or also known as Graviton Punch. And I think my cat turned off my camera again.
We lost you again. Anyhow, well, I can go ahead and share mine. I also do have a game to share. So this is a game called Malignant Survivors. And it is one of these kind of vampire survivors types games. I'll go ahead and play a little bit of the Steam page here. You can kind of see what's going on. Another game made with Unity ECS. And you can see that there's a lot of things happening on the screen right now, like just a lot of enemies coming in, different attacks being sent out, all these damage icons and everything. And it is running really smooth, at least in this video here. So,
wait, did you say it's also entities?
Yes.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
It is kind of giving Vampire Survivor vibes right now.
Yeah, exactly. It is one of these kind of Vampire Survivor
survivors
type games. Yeah, and then but I mean it's only like $1.60 right now, so I picked it up. I haven't played it or anything, but yeah, definitely really cool. Always cool to see like new games with dots, ECS, and everything like that. And yeah, it just looks like a cool, fun little Vampire Survivors game. So if you want to mess around with it for $1.60, then feel free to check it out. So anyways, that is episode 4 of the Hot Path Show. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. We had a lot of good questions when we were talking about our damage system. So we'll be back next week. It's going to be myself and Tobias is going to be taking over points on a exciting topic. And then the following week, then I'll kind of continue on talking about some things in my combat system that I was sharing today. But yeah, with that, Danny, you got any parting words for us?
Not really. I mean, I'm excited for whatever you guys are going to come up with next week. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Very much looking forward to it. Well, thanks again, everybody. And real quick, before we head out, I do just want to give a quick thank you to our all of our Patreon supporters, especially the ones at the CPU register tier, which is our highest tier. So thank you to eCool for supporting us over there. And thank you to everybody else for supporting us over on Patreon. Once again, feel free to check it out at patreon.com/turbomakesgames. And over there, we have a bunch of cool bonuses. Got some exciting kind of bonus videos and everything coming up. So be sure to check that out. So anyways, with that, I hope you all have a fantastic weekend ahead, and we'll see you on the next episode. Later, everybody.